If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
I talk a lot about how teams like the Pirates need to thread that needle, but I feel like at this point in time, it's kind of like walking a line in Johnny Cash style, where if you lean one side too much, then it's almost like you have to buy into that narrative. You have to jump on board of something and not ever get back on that line, never switch to the other side. Something that, Scott and I have been talking about behind the scenes a lot. These hot takes, different things that's going on. But we weren't planning on recording while the Pirates were playing tonight, but we are. So I will ask you, Scott, how you doing today, brother?
I'm good. It doesn't quite feel like summer, but summer's here. Kids are out of school, and Brian Reynolds is starting to heat up. So you and I, we don't like hot takes, and we're not afraid to admit we were wrong about something. Unlike a lot of people who will bend the facts to meet their narrative, I can readily admit that I was ready to DFA Canario after about 2 games, and I was wrong. And even though he hasn't been playing very much, Tommy Pham has been inexplicably getting a ton of playing time. I'm ready to keep Canario around.
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, anybody that's watching the game that is going on tonight as we were recording, we're basically pointing out little things that are going on. Tommy Pham makes a slide, and I'm like, okay, I'm not even going to open up the phone. That's going to be, Twitter fodder or social media fodder. People will not even mention the amazing play that IKF made because you've already decided that he, is not an everyday shortstop. It was something that we kind of talked about during this past offseason, and I basically said I maybe bought into the noise, bought into the news. I do believe that IKF can play a bunch of different positions. He's shown it throughout his career, winning a Gold Glove at third base. With a lot of these players, maybe second base is their best position, but has had some good years at shortstop. And I looked into the numbers a lot more, put them out during a previous episode, that his top years, aside from last year when his offensive numbers went up with the Blue Jays when they were kind of bouncing around to different positions, he had his best years at least in totality with WAR. And I know that WAR has its warts and stuff that may not, work itself out and people will fight back against that. But overall kind of had his best years with the Rangers when he was playing their full-time shortstop, with the Yankees when he was their full-time shortstop. So, I mean, you don't have to look for, these little plays and these little mistakes that he made, because, the guys that are great at shortstop, they kind of win the Gold Gloves. There may be other guys in competition, but if you have a competent shortstop who is a fairly good hitter, at least for average, and right now with the on base, the OPS, pushing itself up over 700, like, you can't mention, okay, well, IKF's been a really good hitter, but I mean, I still feel like he's playing out of position. Like, you have to let those narratives go. You have to just basically say, we might need to find another shortstop next season. But right now, that doesn't need to be mentioned. IKF's not the problem. IKF's defense at shortstop is not the problem. there's problems elsewhere. So kind of let that go. And maybe, like we've talked about, possibly look into solving the shortstop problem because you don't really have a guy sitting there and waiting, and you're going out in free agency. And Scott, who is going to be at the top of the list or near the top of the list that you could sign?
IKF would potentially be one of your best options. So why not give him like a David Freeze style extension? 2 years. Yeah, because I look back to see what the David Freeze extension was. So it was 2 years, $11 million with a club option for the third year, and that was in 2016. IKF is making 6.283 million in the last year of his contract he signed with the Blue Jays. Yeah, sign him for a couple more years. You don't have anybody in AAA really breaking down the door, showing that they can be a competent everyday shortstop. And yeah, if you're going to go out, you're going to have to trade a whole bunch to get a good shortstop that's going to be this RBI producer, this middle of the order guy, because those are the premium positions. You got to try to find and fill those in. Maybe somewhere like we were talking in the offseason. There's more of those guys for in the outfielders that fit that bill and supply and demand versus a shortstop. So fix the defense, have a guy that gets on base. If he had enough at bats to qualify, he'd be like the number 5 or 6 in batting average in the league. So that's not a problem. But at the same time, if you trade him, he's not a power hitter. Yeah, he gets on base. But really, what are you going to get in return for a half season rental of a guy who's a singles hitter, essentially? You're not going to get a whole lot. He means more to your team than what you'll get in return. So just lock him up and find your RBI somewhere else.
Yeah, because I mean, if when we got him, I mean, we traded Charles McAdoo, who was the flavor of the season or the flavor of the month. I looked at his numbers recently. He has not been doing great. He was a player that was showing some promise, had a decent hit tool, could play third base, could play like an outfield position. But I mean, at that point in time, it's like a year and a little bit of control. When you're trading what is essentially at this point in time would be viewed as like a rental, you're looking at, I mean, Carlos Santana was performing fairly well for us, and you get a, you know, former international signing, lottery ticket, like complex league or Dominican summer league player for that little bit. Yeah, I mean, to me, if he's happy, and we've talked about this before, obviously was not happy when Shelton was still here, was talking about, you know, different stuff that was going on in the clubhouse. Since Donnie's been in there, seems to be a little bit happier. Did have, you know, at least some interaction. I did read something on DK, and I don't know if it was McAfee or Negron. I want to maybe give credit to the person who it was. I can't remember which one it was, so I'll give it to both. But was basically talking about, you know, the difficulty of hitting in PNC Park for the right-handed hitters, which we kind of really knew because, I mean, I think we've always talked about, man, it would be nice to have a left-handed slugger in the outfield that could, you know, hit bombs, you know, like Jack Swinsky did a couple years ago. But, you know, yeah, I mean, there's that catch-22 with that. Where do you move the fence in like some other parks have done? I believe that Baltimore had done, you know, for their hitters, but then that negatively affects, you know, your left-handed pitchers like a Bailey Falter, who's obviously not a ground ball guy and gives up, you know, a lot of the fly balls, a lot, you know, some potential home runs. Andrew Heaney, same. It's not like we've had like any of those left-handed pitchers that we brought in for their rejuvenations, their renaissance, that, you know, were these guys that were these ground ball pitchers. Like it's because it plays to PNC Park. And I think you mentioned before the show that, you know, IKF's not really a slug guy to begin with. And yeah, that I think McCutcheon the other night really thought he got all of that one and got enough to get it over the wall there, but he knows that wall pretty well. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times where you'll see those balls hit out there into left field that will be saved and saved by the pitchers that would be home runs. And I think McCutcheon's was in the article was in 24 parks, that's a home run, but in PNC Park, that's saved.
Yeah. As we're watching the game and we're seeing the exact scenario you were just talking about, where if the Astros were playing in their home ballpark, that's way gone. But Tommy Pham catches it against the wall on the warning track. So and I think that when you were looking at this, the math for whether you should retain IKF, if he's willing to, these are people that have feelings and preferences and have to make their own decisions. But if you are looking at what does he mean for us and what does he mean if we trade him at the trade deadline, the buyers are looking for players that will make a splash, that will provide they'll be difference makers. A Marlon Byrd, like we had in 13, came in, hit home runs, played good enough defense, really made an impact. IKF is a great guy for the marathon of the season. He's going to he's going to get on base. He's going to steal some bases. He's going to play solid defense. He's not flashy, but he is solid. And that just means more to a team over the course of the year to maximize the value that way versus, somebody going out and getting him and having to have him and being able to give up something that they don't want to part with in order to have that.
Yeah, and I think a piece of that even goes into like how we as Pirates fans value our own players.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, if you look back a year ago, when IKF was traded for, it was like, well, the Pirates didn't do enough. We needed that splash signing. But now, like, it's almost like it's going to be built up, and I can almost think about it in my head that, it's going to be like, well, IKF's performing well, so we're going to be able to trade that because that's a splash signing for that other team. Well, if it wasn't a splash signing when he was performing well for the Blue Jays, why is it a splash signing when we trade him? It's the same thing as like when we traded Adam Frazier. And I love Adam Frazier. Like he's just one of those like just good ball players, like the guys that like I cheer for, obviously a Pittsburgh Pirate. But when we traded him, it was at obvious, the height of his performance. But we knew what Adam Frazier was as a player. Like he would go on those hot streaks. You got him getting into that hot streak, one of the best of his career. But was it really like if any team was just like, oh yeah, we got Adam Frazier, that was not a splash signing. Like we build these players up in our head. And to me, I think about like a Brian Reynolds. And I know I always go back to him for this different stuff, but it's a player we've been talking about, and I've been talking about since this podcast kind of started, is that like he had that 1 year where he was a star and building himself towards superstar. And since that, it's declined to where like he is a star for the Pirates. But if you watch MLB Network, if you watch any other stuff, I mean, they mention Brian Reynolds. They like Brian Reynolds. He's a good ball player. But he's never mentioned in that like star category. So we think, oh, if we trade Brian Reynolds, we're going to trade our star. So we should get the world. Well, yeah, if you trade him a couple years ago when he was still at that, maybe potential superstar level, yeah, you'll get that return that you would want to get. But if you wait to trade him, like I know that like there was a discussion with Cherington, and we're jumping all over the place here, but like that, there's only like a couple untouchable players, and you're talking about a Cruz and a Skeens. And so obviously people are going to be like, okay, what will we get for Reynolds? Well, Reynolds is a really good player. Well, obviously he's not playing good this year, but he's not to the level that everybody thinks he is. It's not major league wide.
Yeah.
Like I think that I had a discussion with somebody where somebody said, "Well, people that knew baseball or were big Pirates fans, they would get that, but that's how the casuals would react." Well, I hate to tell you people, I mean, you're listening to this, you're a diehard, but the majority of Pirates fans who I interact with and who I just interacted with at my, neighbor's 11-year-old birthday party, they're casuals. That's what the majority of Pirates fans are. Do you know what I mean? So like, yeah, they'll think, oh, well, Brian Reynolds, all-star. I remember what Brian Reynolds was like. We should get a ton for him. No, that's not how it works out. That's not how
Yeah.
baseball works out. It's like a very weird paradox, or like we almost get like caught in like our own little world here, our own little bubble here in Pittsburgh. And if somebody's a star for our team, we just think that they're a star everywhere else.
Yeah. And for the trade value of Reynolds, I think the math on that changed when he signed the new contract. You still have him on his initial 6 years of control, and he's performing like that, and you trade him. It's a completely different, even if he's in arbitration, it's a completely different return versus the money he's making now. And I think that, yeah, the mentioning that, when Frazier was traded, I think the fact that he was an all-star starter as well that year really impacted thing. Got some more eyes on him, which could probably drive the price up. But in the articles you were talking about with, I think Jeff Passan that was talking about um, who the Pirates could potentially move. I mean, we may be seeing what we talked about in the offseason with Bednar as one of those that they mentioned. If he's playing well enough to recoup some of that value that he had in the past, and then you try to sell high on him, before, and hopefully it doesn't happen, but before he flames out again, get the most that you can, and then move on to that next man up situation. But then again, same thing you're talking about is I think that Pirate fans will overvalue what they can get for Bednar because he's a Pittsburgh guy, he's the renegade, he's been our closer. Yeah, I hate to tell you, he's not gonna bring you the kind of return that like a Josh Hader brought. He's not at that level, but we have it built up to your point in our minds that yeah, he's the end all be all for closers, and we should get a king's ransom for him. We had one shot at that, and we know how that turned out with closers in the past. So you got to strike while the iron is hot, and maybe not shoot for the moon on all of these guys that we've built up so much, because it's also part of it because we're watching the games and they're a business and their business is selling tickets. So there's a certain level of propaganda, for the lack of a better word, promotion that goes into building these guys up. Hey, you got to come see Bednar. You got to come see Reynolds. Because and that's happened so many times when we're out of the race in May and June, they got to sell tickets. So they're putting it on the backs of these players and really building them up that way.
Yeah, and Bednar has performed, well recently. And I think his trade value is obviously higher at this point in time than it was anytime last season, obviously at the beginning of this season. But it's nowhere near where it was 2 years ago. At that point in time, two-time All-Star, was out there in Major League Baseball. He was, being talked about a lot. Obviously had better numbers than he is now. So it's just like, yeah, you're at this point in time trying to build up that trade value, and then you're not going to get what was possibly being discussed a couple years ago with years of control. Whereas now it's like, okay, well, this is what the Pirates gave him in arbitration during this offseason. Well, if he kind of comes back and performs a little bit better, then we're going to have to pay him more, and we don't have control of this player for as long as we had previously. And to me, that's the weird thing is like, I know that Noah Hiles wasn't working for the Pirates when there was this potential, deal on the table, for Bednar, and then that the higher ups above Charrington, obviously Nutting, kind of nixed that deal. It's weird to me that it's coming out now. And I had it pulled up on my phone last week, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it. Like I could share it out to the world. I have a text message with my brother-in-law when Bednar was struggling last year in April, and I said, "Well, if Nutting wouldn't have nixed a deal at last trade deadline, we might have been able to get something for him." Like that news was already out there. I thought that was almost like common knowledge. And then when Noah, like I said, he wasn't the beat reporter in 2020, 3 when that would have happened. But I mean, it's not like it was new news. So to me, it was weird that was kind of dropped in a little bit of a story, or maybe it was just mentioned to him and he was like, I'm going to, kind of throw it out there. But I mean, man, that was common knowledge. I mean, I was a podcaster and a blogger at that point in time. And it kind of matriculated its way down to me. So number one, like, why didn't anybody who was on the beat at that point in time report it then or during that off season? And then number two, like, yeah, that value is gone. Whether whoever's decision it was, like, that's not going back to what that was, no matter what Bednar does this season.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you want my opinion, yeah, I think you have to move on from him at this point and get the most value that you can, but just kind of brace yourself for what you're going to get back. It's not going to be, like you said, the Hader return. It's not going to be the Tanner Scott return. It's not going to be like one of these top guys in the game anymore. It's going to be, I mean, look what Milwaukee got for Devin Williams. Yeah. You got Nestor Cortez and then another player who's been performing, okay kind of throughout this season. But I mean, you didn't get the Devin Williams return that you would have got when he was the airbender. You got he was kind of injured. He came back. He's performing kind of well. And we got to get what we can for him. So that's what my thing is a lot of these things is just kind of preparing yourselves for if you would trade these types of players. I mean, we talked about Reynolds. You talked about, maybe even Mitch Keller with his promise if you trade him. Right. Does he have as much right now because of the contract he's under? Brian Hayes, obviously, with the way he's performed and, the injury to his back and different types of stuff. Like, where does that go? So, yeah, I mean, we get these players because you said we watch them every single day. They're kind of built up in our heads that it's just like, well, we should get amazing stuff for this. And I don't know if it's going to be that. And this all came off of a conversation that both of us believe that we should probably maybe at least explore the possibility of keeping IKF, because if not, you don't have another answer for next year. And that answer could be, Jared Triolo, who we don't know what he is, because he's gotten playing time sporadically this season, had more playing time at the end of last season. But I mean, God, he could be a piece, but he's obviously not an answer. Are you looking for coverage of all 4 major sports leagues? NFL, NBA, MLB, and NHL. Look no further than SportsVival. At SportsVival, they are dedicated to providing quality sports analysis, up-to-date news and original content with a focus on draft and prospects, analyzing how teams are built and how franchises evolve through their strategic decisions. Without sports, how would we survive? Sportsvival, proud partners of Bucks in the Basement.
So not everybody has to be a big home run hitter or bring a ton of slug. As long as you get on base and you set the table for the rest of the lineup, he's. I think it's perfect how they're using him, having him in the 9 hole, and at a much higher than average clip. He is setting the table for O'Neill Cruz and then McCutchen and Reynolds after them. So it makes a lot of sense to deploy him that way, and he's doing a very good job at it. And the ability to replicate that on the kind of money that he's making or would make, it's really something that they should pursue pretty hard, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I agree with you on that, Scott. I mean, you've brought it up, and you brought it up even a couple weeks ago, like, and I don't think we even really discussed it, just, kind of between me and you. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird just because, I mean, he's not ideal. He's not that splash player. And I think that, like, with each of these signings, we're looking for those splash players. And to be competitive, you will need at least one or two of those guys. I mean, you would hope that you have O'Neill Cruz and he would be, kind of one of those splash players. Bryan Reynolds has worked himself into one of those hopeful pieces, but he's not the piece anymore. And to me, if you kind of make all these trades, do all this stuff, like, it's like, are you robbing Peter to pay Paul? I think I think I made the analogy to you before here. Are we cutting off our nose kind of like to spite our face? Like, yes, we have pitching, we have all this different stuff, or even trading an IKF. People have talked about trading a Keller. Well, you have an established major league pitcher, and then you're bringing up the question marks. And what are you filling that with? Are you going to be able to fill that with major league ready pieces? Well, I mean, people weren't happy when Huntington did that. I mean, he went out there and got Joe Musgrove. He went out there and got Colin Moran, which for the Pirates, I mean, Colin Moran wasn't a terrible player, wasn't a great player, but was a major league player. So, I mean, that's where it's like, okay, you kind of like I said, go back to, like, walking that line. It's like, okay, we traded Starling Marte probably at one of the lowest points of his career, coming off, I believe, like a 1.9 WAR season, wanted to be traded. And everybody praised him. I mean, go back and listen and read everything because he did something different than Huntington. He went for the higher upside players. Now, if you want to blame Cherington and stuff for the development of Peguero, for the development and the injuries that went to Malone, like, okay, that's great. Well, he could have traded Marte for a Colin Moran type player or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So, like, that to me, it's like, I don't know if it's apples and oranges or it's just like you're trying to, like I said, make the argument 10 years later, 5 years later for, what happened and saying, oh, well, that didn't work out. So that was just a terrible trade. Well, it's like, no, he thought it was a good trade at the time because he did something completely different. Like, are you going to toe that line of, just bringing back major league talent and trying to fill those positions? Are you going to take a swing? And maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe it does. But I mean, I don't think we have the talent at this point in time. Just like I don't think we had the talent back then, like, to fill all these holes that you could create with the trades and with the players going out. Like we talked about it, IKF. Like, who does that get replaced by? So then you have a hole at shortstop, along with the hole in left field. can Brian Reynolds play right field long term? Is McCutchen coming back? Is he going to DH? Then you have two outfield spots.
Right.
So like, even if you like work together this magical thing where you trade all these guys, are you going to be able to fill all these holes? And it just makes sense to me to like basically say, IKF, can you do this? Does it happen? I don't know, but at least it keeps you on a level playing field that you have this year that you don't have to replace next year and maybe the year after that.
Yeah, I think of the players being considered for who you can have a ready replacement for. Bednar, Santana is ready to go. I think it'd be the full time closer. We saw him do that. He's very efficient and locks down the games. And Mitch, I think that there's an opportunity if you can not just to offload his contract because he is making quite a bit of money for a team like the Pirates, but you have the arms in AAA that could potentially not perform in the same way that he has been, but there's the opportunity there that they could grow into it. And if you can get an impact bat, but really that comes back around to the same point that we've been making is what do you truly across the league see Mitch as? We like Mitch because we saw him struggle and we saw him succeed, and we've seen him grow into being a solid major league pitcher. But around the league, when you look at his numbers, where do other teams value him, and how much of a value do they really put on him? Is he a number 3? Is he a number 4? He's not a 2 across the league like we see him as here.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like that was like kind of like the same with Musgrove because we knew that we saw the potential with Musgrove. And then once he got to San Diego and when he was healthy, you got to kind of see what he could be. But then you can't take what you saw afterwards and put that to what the trade value was at the time.
Right.
Like, and like I said, that was the same thing kind of with Marte. It was the same thing with Frazier. I mean, you traded Jameson Taillon coming off of a second Tommy John. I mean, you traded JT Brubaker when he hadn't even come back yet. I mean, I'm trying to think of all these players. We talked as Pirates fans, talked so much crap on Josh Bell and his inability to play first base and how he was a streaky DH and thought we should have gotten back like a Juan Soto return for him. Like, not to that degree. Like, I feel like it's a little bit crazy, but like that these players had so much more value. And one thing I wanted to get into before we get going here is Andrew McCutchen and why that kind of like clicked into my head here is that Andrew McCutchen, and I've said this for the past few years, is he's a solid player, has not hindered this team whatsoever when he's been healthy. He got injured a couple years ago, didn't get to finish out the season, but it clicked into my head is like, okay, he's like the third best hitter on this team. That's not his fault. That's the fault of not having better players. But Andrew McCutchen has kind of assumed a little bit of a I don't know if it's leadership role or just more of a emotional face of the team. If anybody watched the John Boy breakdown, it made me laugh hysterically. Not so much for John Boy because everybody knows my feeling. Everybody knows what I feel about him, but just watching Andrew McCutchen stand there, like he's become a little bit more vocal in his old age, maybe in his wisdom, than he had been previously.
Yeah, hearing from players that were a part of that playoff run, 13-15, saying that McCutchen was very much a lead by example kind of guy, and that there were other more vocal leaders in the clubhouse. It's nice to see him take a more active role, a more vocal role in the team now, and he's still leading by example because, like you said, he is one of the better hitters on the team. But like I said in the offseason, the best thing that could happen to this team is some players, hopefully plural, stepping up and making McCutcheon obsolete at this point, because uh, it's it's tough to rely on someone who's 38 years old to be a backbone of your offense.
Yeah, and with that, it's like, I mean, yeah, I mean, his numbers look good compared to, other DHs. I've seen those numbers out there. They look good on the Pirates, but if you have him like, creeping up over the 700 OPS, maybe towards 750, like, yeah, that's not a bad thing. But if you don't have three, four, maybe God, knock on wood, five players that have OPSs higher than him, many of them over 800, like it's not going to be a good thing. So like people will say, well, like, put some respect on Kutch's name. There's a ton of respect coming here. Like there's a ton of respect towards him for what he's doing, and he definitely deserves to be playing in the Pirates lineup. Like that is not against him whatsoever. It's more of just that, yeah, I mean, there's got to be better players on this team, and they have to be found someplace. We're one of the first ones to go in on Bryan Reynolds, this year. People waited and we're like, okay, it's going to, like, yeah, I mean, he has to be better at the beginning of the season. Like, we can't wait for one of these, even if he's a piece and not the piece anymore, he can't be a piece that starts showing up in the last week of May. Like, it just can't happen.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, like, I feel like that people are kind of like reaching to a degree to like say, okay, how can we fill these holes quickly? Because we were kind of promised this rebuild was going to be successful. Well, nobody was promised that. We kind of just thought that. I mean, I thought that myself. There was hope that when this type of thing happens, so it's just like, okay, let's scramble and kind of fix this and do whatever. Well, it's really not that easy, and I don't know if you can trade pieces to fill holes without creating holes in other places, if that makes sense. I feel like I've been rambling a lot this episode. That's not a bad thing, because I'm also paying attention to the game where Mitch Keller was giving up soft hits after soft hit that just kept on finding little holes. So that was kind of in my head. But yeah, I mean, I don't know where this team goes from here. I know obviously it doesn't mean trading Paul Skeens at this point in time. If the national media could stop talking about that, that would be amazing. I've tried to go back and look at articles of, the national media asking for Mike Trout to be traded, but I couldn't find those anywhere. So I'm going to look to see if there's an actual other example of that happening. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what needs to be done. I mean, if I was, I would be an MLB GM, but I mean, I just don't think it can be fixed as quickly by trying to trade to fill these pieces. I think that you need to find out and identify the good players that you have, and like we said, try to keep them around, and the ones that should be a part of this to try to get them going.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day